Snow hammered the streets of Denver that evening, turning Colfax Avenue into a blur of white and wind. The city buses crawled forward like exhausted beasts, their headlights cutting through the storm in shaky beams. Inside one of them, Taylor Miller clutched her small purse and checked her watch again. She was already late for dinner with her fiancé's parents, a dinner she had been dreading for weeks. Her hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the thought of disappointing Tyler Grant, whose mother believed waitresses didn't belong in their family. She had spent her entire paycheck on a simple blue dress and borrowed heels from her coworker, only for the weather to turn into the worst blizzard of the year. As the bus lurched to a stop near Civic Center, the door hissed open, and a frail old man climbed in. His gray coat was too thin for the storm, and his fingers shook as he searched his pockets. I thought I had it," he muttered, patting his coat, his eyes clouded with confusion. The driver's tone was sharp. "No fare, no ride, sir. Step off." The other passengers looked away, pretending not to hear. Taylor hesitated for a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "I've got it," she said, quietly, walking forward through the aisle. The driver frowned. "Miss?" "You don't need to. I said I've got it," she repeated, her voice steady this time. She handed the fare over and smiled at the old man. "Sit down, sir. It's awful out there." The man nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you, young lady. My name's Henry Foster." She nodded politely, Taylor. "Please, warm up a bit." He smiled faintly, but moments later his hand went to his chest, his face drained of color. Taylor froze, realizing what was happening. "Sir? Mr. Foster." He gasped for air, trembling. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees beside him, catching his shoulder. "Do you have medicine?" He nodded weakly, trying to open his coat pocket. She found a small bottle of nitroglycerin pills, unscrewed the cap, and helped him place one under his tongue. The driver shouted for an ambulance, but Henry squeezed her hand. "No, just need to get home," he whispered. Taylor made a decision then and there. When the bus reached the next stop, she helped him off, ignoring the biting wind that cut across her face like glass. They walked slowly down the deserted street, snow swirling around them in thick white sheets. She wrapped her scarf around his neck and guided him toward his small apartment near Capitol Hill. Inside, the heat barely worked and the lights flickered weakly. She made him tea, sat him down on the couch, and waited until his breathing steadied. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly. Taylor smiled, her cheeks still red from the cold. "Because someone should have." He nodded, eyes misting. Kindness like that doesn't come often anymore. She didn't know it yet, but that single act, offering warmth to a stranger in a snowstorm, would change everything about her life. By the time Taylor reached the glass willow, nearly an hour had passed since the reservation time. The blizzard outside had turned into a curtain of white, soaking her coat and hair. Her hands shook as she handed her wet scarf to the hostess. She caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Her makeup had melted into faint smudges beneath her tired eyes, and the curls she had carefully pinned that afternoon now clung damply to her cheeks. Still, she straightened her posture, drew in a breath, and followed the waiter into the dining room. The restaurant shimmered with soft gold light, crystal glasses, and quiet jazz. It was the kind of place she had only seen in magazines. At a round table near the window sat Tyler Grant, his parents, and two elegantly dressed couples. Tyler's mother, Linda Grant, noticed Taylor first. Her smile was thin as a blade. "Well," Linda said, setting down her wine glass, "the storm must have been dreadful. Though one would think a lady would plan ahead for such things." Taylor murmured an apology and took her seat beside Tyler. He didn't meet her eyes. His tie was perfect, his hair slicked back. Every inch of him belonged to this world of polished silver and quiet superiority. She, meanwhile, felt like a smudge on their linen tablecloth. A waiter poured champagne, and the conversation resumed, stocks, vacation homes, and fundraising galas. Taylor tried to follow along, but every word reminded her how out of place she was. When the first course arrived, half a dozen oysters on ice, she froze. The shells gleamed under the candlelight. Foreign and strange. Linda's eyes flicked toward her. "Oh, Taylor," she said sweetly. "You do eat oysters, don't you?" Taylor hesitated, searching for the tiny fork. "I've never actually." Laughter erupted around the table. Linda leaned back, covering her mouth with delicate fingers. "How charming," she said. "Tyler, dear, your fiancé is full of surprises." One of the men added with a smirk, "It's refreshing, isn't it? A woman who still finds the ocean exotic." Heat flooded Taylor's face. She forced a smile, trying to laugh it off, but her throat tightened. Tyler still said nothing. He stirred his drink, pretending not to notice. The room spun slightly, voices blurring under the music. When the main course arrived, lobster tails glistening in butter, Linda continued her quiet attack, slipping in comments about family standards and social compatibility. Each word landed like a slap. Taylor stared at her plate, willing herself not to cry. Finally, she whispered, "Excuse me," and rose from the table. Tyler looked up for the first time, startled. "Taylor, where are you going?" She met his eyes, her voice steady but trembling. "Home." Outside, the cold hit her like a wall. Snow clung to her lashes, melting into tears she didn't bother to hide. She walked down the empty street, heels sinking into the slush, the restaurant's laughter fading behind her. The wind howled, carrying away the last echo of her humiliation. Taylor pulled her coat tighter and kept walking through the storm, unaware that somewhere across the city, the same old man she had helped hours earlier was thinking about her too, remembering the warmth in her voice when the whole world had turned to ice. That night, the storm had finally quieted, leaving Denver buried beneath a blanket of white. Taylor's apartment in Aurora was dimly lit, the old radiator clicking softly as she hung her soaked coat over a chair. Her mother, Ruth Miller, sat wrapped in a knitted shawl on the couch, the faint hum of the oxygen concentrator filling the silence. She looked up from her tea when Taylor came in, her eyes instantly searching her daughter's face. "Sweetheart," Ruth said gently, "you're freezing. Did you at least get there safely?" Taylor forced a nod, slipping off her wet shoes. "I did. I wish I hadn't." She tried to sound calm, but the words trembled. She sat beside her mother and began to tell the story, how Linda Grant had smiled with polite cruelty, how the others had laughed, and how Tyler, the man she thought would stand beside her, hadn't said a single word in her defense. Her voice broke when she reached that part. Ruth listened quietly, her wrinkled hands folded on her lap. When Taylor finished, the older woman let out a long, weary sigh. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she said softly. "People like that, they build their lives on what others think of them. But you, honey, you're built on something real." Taylor looked down, eyes glassy. "I just wanted them to like me. I thought maybe if I worked harder, dressed better, they'd see I was good enough." Ruth reached out and brushed the damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "Good enough," she repeated. "You don't have to earn that from anyone. And if a man lets you be humiliated in front of his family," her tone hardened, quiet but sharp, "a man who lets you be humiliated isn't a man at all." The words hit Taylor with a strange mix of comfort and pain. She leaned into her mother's shoulder, breathing in the faint scent of chamomile and detergent. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind moaned against the window like a tired ghost. Later that night, Taylor woke with chills running through her body. The hours spent in the snow had caught up with her. Ruth hurried to her side, placing a cool hand on her forehead, worry creasing her face. "You're burning up," she whispered, fetching a damp towel. By morning, Taylor's fever raged. Her voice was hoarse, her body weak. On the nightstand, her phone buzzed, Tyler's name lighting the screen. She stared at it, then turned it face down without answering. From that day on, she never called him again. The engagement ring sat untouched on her dresser, a dull reminder of a world she no longer wanted to belong to. A week later, the sky over Denver had cleared, but the city still lay under thick drifts of snow that glimmered under the pale morning sun. Taylor helped her mother into the car, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders before driving carefully toward St. Joseph Medical Center. The heater hummed weakly, filling the silence with a steady hum. Ruth was unusually quiet, her face pale from fatigue. The last few days had been difficult. Her heart had grown weaker, and every step left her breathless. Inside the hospital, the scent of antiseptic filled the air. Taylor guided her mother through the corridor, their shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum floor. They stopped at the cardiology ward's front desk to check in. As Ruth went in for her examination, Taylor sat down in the waiting area, rubbing her cold hands together. That was when she saw him. Henry Foster, the old man from the bus. He was seated across the hall, holding a paper cup of coffee, his hat resting on his knee. His posture was better, his face brighter, though still lined with age. For a moment, Taylor hesitated, wondering if he would even remember her. Then his eyes lifted and recognition flickered instantly. "Well, I'll be," he said with a surprised smile. "The young lady from the blizzard." Taylor's face lit up. "Mr. Foster, you look so much better. I've thought about you since that night. How have you been?" He chuckled softly. "Alive, thanks to you. My doctor said I was a stubborn old fool for walking in that storm, but maybe it was meant to happen that way. Otherwise, I'd never have met you." They talked for a while, and she learned that he came in regularly for his heart checkups. He asked about her mother, and when she explained Ruth's condition, his expression turned gentle and sincere. "I'll pray for her," he said quietly. "You remind me of someone I used to know, someone who cared that deeply." "Your wife?" Taylor asked. He shook his head. "My son," he said, and his voice softened. "Mark Foster." He was 31, brilliant young man, ran his own real estate firm. 2 years ago, he was killed in a carjacking outside Denver. They said it was a robbery gone wrong. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "I buried him myself, but I still talk to him every day." Taylor's throat tightened. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry. No parent should ever have to go through that." Henry nodded, blinking back the emotion in his eyes. "You have a good heart, Taylor. Don't lose that, no matter what the world throws at you." When Ruth's appointment ended, Taylor promised to visit again. And she did every few days, stopping by to share coffee and small talk with the lonely old man whose life she had unknowingly changed that night on Colfax. Over the next few weeks, Taylor found herself returning to St. Joseph more often than she expected. Sometimes to accompany her mother, sometimes just to see Henry Foster. What began as polite conversation in the hospital waiting room turned into warm, easy companionship. They'd meet for coffee in the small hospital cafe, where Henry always ordered the same black roast and Taylor the cheapest latte on the menu. He liked to talk, not in the self-centered way of lonely men, but with genuine curiosity. "You remind me of my son," he said once, smiling across the table. He worked himself to the bone too. Always said he'd rest when things were stable, but they never are they? Taylor laughed softly, stirring her coffee. "I guess not. I work 2 shifts most days, one at the cafe downtown and one at the diner on 6th Avenue. I'm saving for my mom's treatment, but," she hesitated, her voice fading. "Sometimes it feels like I'm running in place." Henry nodded, understanding the exhaustion behind her words. "You're doing what good people do. The world needs more of that, though it rarely pays you back." One afternoon, she told him about the dinner at the Glass Willow. She didn't plan to. It simply slipped out during their talk. Her hands twisted around the paper cup as she recounted the laughter, the oysters, and Tyler's silence. Henry's expression darkened. "Let me tell you something." "Taylor," he said quietly, "money and manners don't make character. I've known men with empires who had nothing decent left in them." His words comforted her more than she expected. No pity, no surprise, just truth. A few days later, when Ruth was admitted for overnight observation, Taylor spent the afternoon with Henry at his small apartment in Capitol Hill. It was neat and old-fashioned, the shelves filled with books and framed photographs. On the mantel, a single picture caught her attention. A young man with kind eyes and a confident smile, standing beside Henry in front of a real estate office sign that read Foster and Company. "That's Mark," Henry said, following her gaze. "He was everything I could have hoped for. Smart, ambitious, good-hearted. He used to bring me flowers on Sundays. Said they made the house look alive." Taylor smiled sadly. He seemed steady, the kind of person who made people feel safe. Henry's eyes misted. "He did. Losing him broke something in me I didn't know could break." Then he looked at her and added quietly, "But meeting you, it's like the world's given me a small piece of him back." The words struck something deep within Taylor. She'd never known her own father. He'd left when she was a child, and hearing that from Henry filled a hollow space she hadn't realized was still open. From then on, she stopped calling him Mr. Foster. He became simply Henry, and every visit felt less like an obligation and more like coming home. In the sterile halls of a hospital and the warmth of his cluttered apartment, two lonely souls, one young, one old, found the faint light of hope flickering back to life. The morning air was crisp and pale when Taylor met Henry outside Fairmount Cemetery. Patches of snow still clung to the grass, glittering under the early sunlight. Henry carried a small bouquet of white lilies wrapped in paper. "Mark always liked these," he said quietly as they walked past rows of headstones. His breath came out in short clouds, his steps slow but steady. They reached a modest granite marker nestled beneath a bare oak tree. The name Mark Foster was etched cleanly into the stone, the date of his supposed death 2 years earlier. Henry knelt, brushing the snow from the base with trembling hands. "I still can't believe he's gone," he murmured. "Every time I come here, it feels like he'll just walk up behind me and say, 'Dad, what are you doing talking to rocks?'" Taylor placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "He would have been proud of you," she said softly. "You've kept his memory alive." Henry gave a weak smile and bowed his head to pray. The cemetery was silent except for the faint whistling of the wind through the trees. Then, from behind them, came the crunch of footsteps on the frozen path. Taylor turned first. A man was approaching slowly, his hood pulled low, his coat dusted with frost. Something about the way he moved, cautious yet purposeful, made her heartbeat quicken. When he drew closer, he stopped a few steps away and spoke in a low, shaking voice. "Dad." Henry's head jerked up. He blinked, confused, staring at the stranger as if his eyes couldn't focus. Who are you?" he whispered. The man reached up and pulled back his hood. His face was pale, marked by a thin scar running along his cheek. But his eyes, those same blue-gray eyes from the photo on Henry's mantel, were unmistakable. "It's me," he said softly. "It's Mark." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The lilies slipped from Henry's hands, scattering across the snow. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then his body wavered, and he collapsed onto his knees. "Henry!" Taylor cried, rushing to catch him as he fell. Mark was beside them in an instant, kneeling in the snow, holding his father's shoulders. "Dad, it's okay. It's me. I am alive." Henry's eyelids fluttered. When he opened them again, tears streamed down his face. He reached out a trembling hand and touched his son's cheek as if afraid the vision might vanish. "You're real," he gasped. "My boy, I buried you. I owe God." Mark held him tightly, his voice breaking. I wanted to come sooner. I couldn't. It wasn't safe. Taylor stood beside them, stunned, her breath visible in the cold air. The grave that bore his name glistened behind them, half covered in snow, while the living man knelt before it. After a long silence, Henry whispered through sobs, "Let's go home. Tell me everything." Mark nodded, still holding his father close. "I will, Dad," he said. "I'll tell you everything." And together, with Taylor walking beside them, they left the cemetery, 3 figures moving through the winter light, carrying a miracle the world had long buried. That evening, the small apartment on Capitol Hill was filled with the faint hum of the radiator and the smell of hot tea. Henry sat in his worn armchair, still pale and trembling from the shock, his eyes never leaving his son. Taylor sat quietly on the couch, hands wrapped around a mug, still trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. Across from them, Mark Foster, alive, scarred, and older than his years, leaned forward, his voice steady but low. "I need to tell you everything," he began, "because the man who tried to kill me is still out there, and he's thriving." Henry's hand clenched around the armrest. "Who?" Mark hesitated for a moment, then said the name like it burned his tongue. "Richard Grant." Taylor froze. The name struck her like a jolt. She looked at Henry, then back at Mark. "Richard Grant, as in Tyler Grant's father?" Mark nodded grimly. "The same." He took a deep breath. 2 years ago, Richard came to me with a business proposal. He wanted to merge our companies, Grant Realty and Foster and Company, to form one of the largest real estate firms in Colorado. He said it would be equal partnership, but most of the funding came from me. I trusted him. I thought he was my friend. Henry's eyes narrowed. "And he betrayed you?" Mark nodded. "He wanted everything, my assets, my clients, even my patents on new development software. When the market started turning against him, he panicked. He needed a way out. So he arranged a meeting late one night outside the city, said he had an urgent investor to introduce. When I got there, the investor was a hired gun." Taylor's stomach tightened as he continued. "I tried to fight back, but he shot me. The car went off the road into a ravine. They dragged another body into the wreck, set it on fire, and left me for dead." He paused, his eyes distant. "I would have died there too if it wasn't for Caleb Whitmore, a forest ranger who found me barely breathing the next morning. He carried me to his cabin, tended my wounds, and kept me hidden for months." Henry's voice trembled. "All that time, all those nights, I prayed." Mark reached out and took his father's hand. "I wanted to come back, Dad, but I needed proof first. Richard has friends in the police, lawyers, people who owe him favors. I couldn't risk showing up without evidence." He pulled out a small notebook from his coat pocket, pages worn, stuffed with papers, flash drives, and photographs. "I've been collecting everything. Bank transfers, property deeds, emails, even the weapon serial numbers. It took 2 years, but I finally have enough." Taylor stared at him in awe and disbelief. "So you're going to expose him?" Mark nodded, eyes cold and resolute. "Yes, I'm done hiding. It's time everyone knows who Richard Grant really is." Henry leaned back, tears glistening in his eyes. "You came back from the dead, son. Maybe now justice will too." Silence filled the apartment after Mark's words. The old clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the heavy seconds that followed. Henry sat motionless, staring at his son as if still afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile reality of his return. But it was Taylor who spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard Grant," she said slowly, her throat tightening around the name. "That's Tyler's father." Mark looked up at her, studying her expression. "You knew him?" "I was engaged to his son," she admitted. The words tasted bitter now. I met Richard once at dinner. He seemed polite, charming even. I had no idea, her voice cracked. No idea what kind of man he really was. Henry's face hardened. That family has poisoned everything they touch. Taylor's mind raced. Images of Linda's disdainful smile, Tyler's silence, and Richard's firm handshake flickered through her memory like shards of a broken mirror. He needs to confess, she said suddenly, her tone sharp with conviction. If he admits what he did, it'll destroy every lie he's built. You said he's arrogant, right? That kind of man can't resist talking when he thinks he's in control. Mark's brow furrowed. Taylor, no. You're not going near him. She straightened her shoulders. I could go to his office. Pretend I want to talk about Tyler. Maybe say I saw someone who looks like you. See how he reacts. I'll record it all. Henry's eyes widened. That's madness, he said, his voice trembling. You'd be walking into a snake pit. That man has already ordered a murder. But Taylor didn't flinch. He doesn't know who I am to you, she said quietly. To him, I'm just the ex-fiancé who disappeared after a breakup. He'd never expect me. Mark stood abruptly, pacing the room. Absolutely not. I won't let you risk your life. I didn't survive 2 years in hiding just to watch someone else get hurt. She looked at him steadily, her voice soft but unyielding. You said it yourself, he's untouchable without proof. You need help. Let me do this, not because you owe me anything, but because what he did can't go unpunished. For a long moment, Mark said nothing. Finally, he sighed, rubbing his temple. All right, he murmured, but we'll do it right. No heroics. He reached for his phone. I know someone we can trust, Detective Alan Pierce. He worked with my company before. Honest man, hat es Korruption. If anyone can reopen the case, it's him. Henry exhaled in relief. Good. Bring it into the light. That's where evil dies. Mark nodded, determination hardening his voice. Then that's what we'll do. We'll take everything to Pierce, and this time, Richard Grant won't be able to bury the truth. Over the following weeks, the quiet apartment on Capitol Hill became a base of operations. Files, photos, and flash drives filled Mark's dining table. Taylor spent her nights sorting documents and cross-checking old employee records from Grant Real Estate, using contacts she still had from her brief engagement to Tyler. Meanwhile, Detective Alan Pierce discreetly began his investigation, reopening the sealed case from 2 years prior. Richard Grant has friends in high places, Pierce warned during one late-night meeting. If we move too soon, he'll make this disappear again. We need a confession, or at least something that ties him directly to the hitman. Mark nodded grimly. Then we make him talk. They planted small tracking devices, monitored Richard's meetings, and recorded every financial transaction Pierce could legally trace. The pattern was clear. Money transfers to offshore accounts, hush payments to former employees, and irregular withdrawals around the time of Mark's death. Taylor worked tirelessly beside Mark. She was resourceful and precise. Her knowledge of the Grant family's habits invaluable. One evening, she found an old internal email chain showing Richard's signature authorizing a mysterious cash advance to a consultant days before the shooting. That consultant, Pierce confirmed, was a known contract killer now serving time in another state. It was enough. On a frigid Friday night, they decided to confront him. The plan was simple. Mark would go in, Pierce's team would stay close, and Taylor would monitor the audio feed from the car. The office of Grant Real Estate loomed dark and silent in downtown Denver, its glass facade reflecting the streetlights. Inside, Richard was working late, reviewing contracts at his mahogany desk. When the door opened, he didn't look up immediately. I told you no meetings after 8, he snapped. The voice that answered froze him in place. Then this won't take long. Richard's pen rolled off the desk. Slowly he looked up, and the color drained from his face. No, he whispered. That's impossible. Mark stepped out of the shadows, his scar catching the faint light. Hello, Richard, he said evenly. Did you miss me? For a moment, Richard just stared, his mouth open, breath shallow. Then his voice broke into a nervous laugh. You're not real. You died. They found your car. I saw the reports. You saw what you paid to see. Mark cut in. I survived your bullet. And now you're going to answer for what you did. Richard rose, his chair scraping the floor. You can't prove anything. This is trespassing, Foster. I'll have you arrested. Mark leaned forward, placing a small recorder on the desk. Go ahead. Call your lawyer. But first, tell me, how much did you pay to have me killed? Richard's mask slipped for a second. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. You have no idea what you're talking about, he hissed. It was business. You left me no choice. The words hung in the air like a confession. Behind the tinted windows, Pierce's team exchanged glances. The detective's hand hovered over the radio. Mark's voice hardened. You took my company, my life, my father's peace. And you call that business. Richard's composure cracked. You were naive. The market was collapsing. It was you or me. That was enough. The office door burst open, and Detective Pierce entered, badge raised. Richard Grant, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud. Richard staggered back, eyes wild. You can't do this. Pierce replied coldly, You already did. As they cuffed him, Richard's gaze locked on Mark, half disbelief, half fear. Mark said nothing. Taylor watched from the car across the street, tears of relief blurring her view of the flashing lights. For the first time in 2 years, justice had a face, and it was alive. The courtroom of Denver County Courthouse was packed on the morning of the trial. Reporters whispered in the back rows, their pens poised over notepads. The fall of Richard Grant, once one of the city's most respected developers, had become headline news. At the front of the room, Mark Foster sat beside his attorney, calm and composed, while Henry and Taylor watched from the gallery, their hands tightly clasped. When the bailiff called the court to order, Judge Morgan entered, her expression stern. The state of Colorado versus Richard Grant, the clerk announced. Charges: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Richard sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than he ever had before. Gone was the tailored confidence and polished arrogance. The man before them looked hollow, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. His lawyer leaned close, whispering rapidly, but Richard stared straight ahead, as if already hearing his sentence. The prosecution began with the evidence Mark and Detective Alan Pierce had gathered, the bank transfers, the offshore accounts, the hitman's testimony confirming Grant's payment. Then came the witnesses. First was Caleb Whitmore, the ranger who had found Mark in the woods 2 years earlier. His voice carried steady through the hushed courtroom. He was barely alive, Caleb said. Gunshot wound to the shoulder. I took him to my cabin and kept him hidden. He said he couldn't go to the police. Someone powerful wanted him gone. Gasps rippled through the spectators. The next witnesses, former employees of Grant Real Estate, spoke reluctantly but truthfully. They admitted being coerced into falsifying documents, laundering money, and destroying evidence after Mark's disappearance. Each testimony drove another nail into Richard's defense. When Mark himself took the stand, the silence was absolute. He recounted the night of the attack, the betrayal, and the years spent gathering proof. He took my company, my name, and almost my life, he said steadily. But he couldn't take the truth. That's what brought me back. Richard's lawyer tried to object, but even the judge's patience had worn thin. By the time closing arguments ended, there was little doubt left. After a brief recess, the jury returned. The foreman stood, his voice clear. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. Richard's shoulders sagged. The judge's sentence came swiftly. 15 years in federal prison, with confiscation of all corporate and personal assets obtained through fraudulent means. Grant real estate will be lawfully restored to its original owner, Mark Foster. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Henry closed his eyes, tears glinting in the corners, while Taylor exhaled shakily, her heart pounding. Justice had finally spoken. Outside, as cameras flashed, Mark stood beside his father and Taylor. "It's over," Henry whispered, gripping his son's hand. Mark shook his head gently. "No," he said, glancing toward Taylor. "It's beginning again." In the weeks that followed, Henry seemed to grow younger, full of purpose once more. Taylor went back to work, quietly saving for her mother's surgery. Though life was still hard, for the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like something they had earned. The days following the trial brought both relief and exhaustion. Taylor devoted every hour she could to caring for her mother, Ruth, whose heart condition had suddenly worsened. The doctors at St. Joseph Medical Center urged immediate surgery, but the cost was far beyond what Taylor had managed to save. She sat by the hospital bed one evening, holding her mother's frail hand. "Just a few more weeks, Mom," she whispered, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "I'll find a way." Ruth, half asleep, squeezed her daughter's hand weakly. "You've already done enough, sweetheart," she murmured. "Don't wear yourself thin for me." But Taylor couldn't give up. She worked double shifts at the diner, sold what little jewelry she had, and begged for an advance from her manager. Still, it wasn't enough. Each night, she prayed for a miracle she no longer believed in. Then, one gray morning, her phone rang. The caller ID read, St. Joseph Medical Center, Billing Department. Her stomach dropped as she answered. "Ms. Miller," said the voice on the other end. "I'm calling regarding your mother's upcoming surgery. I just wanted to confirm her preoperative tests. Everything's cleared, and the payment's been received in full." Taylor blinked. "What?" "There must be some mistake. I haven't paid anything." The woman hesitated, then replied, "It's already processed. Anonymous donation, covering the entire procedure and post-op care. Your balance is 0. For a moment, Taylor couldn't speak. Her throat closed, and the tears came before she could stop them. Do you know who?" "I'm sorry, Mom." The donor asked to remain confidential. Taylor hung up, trembling, but deep down she already knew. When she arrived at the hospital later that day, the nurses were prepping Ruth for surgery. Taylor kissed her mother's forehead, whispering, "You're going to be okay." Then, stepping into the hallway, she saw a simple bouquet of lilies placed on the waiting room table. White lilies, the kind Henry always brought to Mark's grave. Attached was a small card. It read in neat handwriting, "For the woman who raised someone brave enough to fight for others, M." Taylor pressed the card to her chest, tears spilling freely now. She didn't need to see him to know. Mark had kept his promise to bring light back where darkness had been. The surgery went perfectly. When Ruth woke up, Taylor sat beside her, smiling through her tears. "We're going home soon, Mom," she whispered. Someone made sure of that. And though Mark never mentioned it, she could feel the weight of his quiet kindness lingering, something deeper than gratitude, something that neither of them had dared to name yet, but both understood completely. Spring arrived gently in Estes Park, brushing the mountainsides with soft green and melting the last patches of winter snow. The world felt new, as if nature itself was exhaling after a long, breathless season. And in a warm wooden lodge tucked between tall pines, Taylor Miller found something she never thought she would again: peace. She and Ruth moved in quietly after the surgery, welcomed without hesitation by Henry and Mark. The cabin was modest but filled with warmth. Knitted blankets draped over armchairs, sunlight pouring across a well-worn kitchen table, and the soft crackle of a fireplace that never seemed to go out. Taylor helped Henry tend a small garden behind the house, their hands in the earth as birds sang above them. Ruth sat nearby most days, bundled in a shawl, sipping tea and smiling as though life had just returned color to her world. Mark spent his mornings repairing the porch or chopping wood. Sometimes, when he looked at Taylor, his gaze held a mixture of gratitude and quiet admiration, as if he still couldn't believe someone like her had crossed paths with someone like him. Their conversations were simple but full. Shared laughter over burnt toast, long walks beneath tall fir trees, quiet evenings watching stars scatter across the clear mountain sky. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions, just two lives slowly weaving themselves together again, thread by thread. News from Denver arrived eventually, carried by curious whispers and local broadcasts. Linda Grant, stripped of luxury and influence, could no longer host charity galas or command whispers at high-end restaurants. The Grant name, which once opened doors, now closed them. And Tyler? His engagement to Taylor had become a footnote in gossip circles, overshadowed by his father's downfall. The company shattered, investors fled, and Tyler's polite charm could not save him from the wreckage. One afternoon, while Taylor browsed a small grocery in town, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to find Tyler standing there. His coat was rumpled, his eyes dull. "Taylor," he said, almost pleading. "I lost everything." Mark approached from the next aisle, presence steady and calm. Tyler stiffened, shock flaring in his eyes, seeing the man he believed gone forever standing here, alive and quietly strong. Mark didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Tyler with a calm that felt far heavier than anger. "You didn't lose it all, Tyler," he said softly. "You gave it away." Tyler opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth weighed too much. Mark gently placed a hand on Taylor's back and guided her away. She glanced over her shoulder only once to see Tyler standing alone, head bowed, the cost of his silence finally visible in the lines of his face. Back at the cabin, the late afternoon sun spilled through the windows, warming the wood floors. Taylor stood by the glass and watched patches of snow melt into small streams, winding their way down the mountain like silver threads. She breathed in the crisp air, feeling the quiet